Perfection. Perfection is a word that I have strived for my entire life, my entire career. Perfection is a word that I thought, if I just was perfect, if I could get the perfect score, if I could look perfect, if I could score perfectly on this test, if I could get the perfect procedure for this patient, if I could be the perfect mom, I would find joy. I would find grit. I would find resilience. And I would find success. I'm here to tell you that I have actually learned quite the opposite. I've learned throughout my career, my time as a mother, my time as a wife, as a sister, as a daughter, my time as a woman physician in a very male-dominated field, that the biggest joy in my life, the biggest success, the biggest resilience, the tenacity, the fun, the meaning has come from my imperfections, has come from a place of failure. If we think about what success is, what resilience is, what makes people really gritty in what they are, we think about what's on top of the iceberg. We think about all of the things that allow people to succeed. And when we stand on stages like I'm standing now, we often brag about our grants we've received, our publications, all of the awards and the accolades and all the wonderful things that we have done. We don't show the world most times what's underneath the iceberg, all of our failures, our trials, our tribulations. For example, this is me this past week. I spent the last week in a tropical location, and the picture of me that you see up here in the green is what I posted on my Instagram feed. I look perfect, my skin is aglow. You can imagine that there's butterflies swirling on top of my head. But in reality, I spent several hours in my hotel room thinking about this talk, working on different projects, eating a bag of Twizzlers. I didn't post that on Instagram because that's not what we post and that's not what we project. We want to project perfection. As I thought about my life and I thought about what I want to share today, I want to go back and talk to a young Dr. Shillcutt. I want to tell her things that I want to tell you today. Number one, I want to tell you that resilient people share their failure. They're not afraid to admit when they've made a big mistake or a small mistake. They don't hide behind a veil of perfection. In 1961, an OBGYN from Australia posted a 5-sentence letter to The Lancet. And he basically said, I think I've failed. I've noticed that I've been treating nausea and vomiting and giving a sedative to several of my patients who are pregnant. And those patients have given birth to stillborn infants or infants who are missing limbs. I think that this is something that I've actually contributed to and given to my patients. Has anyone else noticed this? It took 5 sentences and an admittance of failure, of a complication, to save thousands and tens of thousands of future infants. That drug was thalidomide. And his ability to share that, which we depend on in science, we depend on sharing negative studies, things that come out, complications. But when it comes to ourselves, we often don't share those failures. We're too afraid. I would also tell her, Dr. Shillcutt, resilient people turn vulnerability into their strengths. They're not afraid to see what they have failed, their weak spots. They're not afraid to surround themselves with people that will actually point out those weak spots. They're very open about them. I would tell a young Dr. Shillcutt that resilient people, to be resilient, you want to normalize failure. In my profession, physicians have one of the highest suicide rates in the country. We are on the front lines taking care of people. We see people at their most vulnerable state, and it takes a toll on us. And it's devastating. I personally have lost 4 of my colleague friends to suicide. And there was some research team in 2013, Zwack and Schweitzer, who decided they were going to study this. They were going to look at physicians who work in high acuity areas, such as surgeons, and they're going to try to figure out what makes this surgeon, who may have suffered a complication, a failure, a professional failure, get back up and go on, versus his colleague or her colleague who has a huge amount of anxiety, depression, and suicidal ideation. What makes these two surgeons different? They found 4 main variables, and one of them was so interesting. One of them was that the physicians who were resilient, the surgeons who could go through a very difficult complication or a professional failure and then bounce back up, they had what they called a margin of failure. They accepted that about themselves. Being in this field, they were going to have complications. They were likely going to fail sometimes, versus the other physicians who had a perfectionistic ideal, which is what we're trained to do in medicine. From a very early age, we're trained to get perfect scores, get a perfect grade so that we can get to the perfect college and the perfect fellowship. And those physicians that were the most resilient accepted a margin of failure. I would also tell you and tell her, the young Dr. Shillcutt, who thought it was great to be a perfectionist, a very important thing, probably the most difficult thing about failure. I would tell her to seek feedback about her failure. I want to take you to a very tragic story. This is a true story. It happened to me. I had a very successful medical school career. I was in the top of my class. I made the honor society in medicine. I was the chief resident, and I'd never shied away from difficult cases. I took a lot of pride in the fact that I was very, very good clinically, and nothing really could stump me, and I wasn't afraid. And it was about 6 months into being an attending as a cardiac anesthesiologist who works in the operating room, and I was on call one night, and the buck stopped with me. While I had about 10 other anesthesiology physicians who were there in training, I was the attending on call. And a very small patient came in, and through a series of complications and very unfortunate events, our operating room team lost that patient. And I can still hear, as I stand here today, the beeping of the heartbeat and the horrible sound of silence. I was so devastated because this had never happened to me before. And while the facts would reveal that it was not completely my error, that it was not really anyone's error, it was a series of events and a very sick patient, that didn't matter. I was convinced that this was my fault. I went home in the morning and I sat comatose on my couch. I didn't know how to even process the events of the night because I had never failed like this. I thought about it. I thought about walking into the hospital the next day and seeing another patient, and I couldn't bring myself to do it. I called my husband. I wrote a letter of resignation, and I told my husband I'm going to go to work tomorrow and turn in my letter of resignation. To which he said, okay, if that's what you need to do. Of course, in his mind, he was thinking of all of our student loans, having a freak out. But he came home that night and sat with me, and I still hadn't moved. I just was overcome with grief. I was overcome with shame, and I couldn't face going back to the hospital. I felt so terrible that I had contributed to this, and about 9 o'clock at night, my phone rang. On the other end of the line was one of my partners. He was in his early 70s at the time. He was just about to retire. A very long, successful career. And he asked me a question. He said, "How are you doing?" And on the other end of the line, I couldn't speak. I just sobbed. And the most amazing thing happened. He sobbed too. And then he started to share with me a similar event that happened to him. And he started offering me feedback about my failure. He started offering me feedback about this complication that I never thought I would have. He started giving me and telling me and normalizing through his own experience what had happened and what I needed to do to process it. And then the last thing he said to me changed the trajectory of my career. It changed who I am as a person, as a mother, as a wife, as a sister, as a friend. He said, tomorrow, you have to go back to work. You have to get up, and you have to take care of the next patient who needs you, and the next patient who needs you. And he taught me how to seek feedback for my failure, that it was okay to fail and to process it and to work through it and to ask for help. I would also tell Dr. Shillcutt the most important thing here is to fail forward. I would tell her that she's going to fail a lot, and it's okay to fall down as long as you stand back up. Brush yourself off, look to your right and your left, see who's around, and seek feedback. And I'll leave you with this last story. Now let's fast forward 12, 13 years. And Dr. Shillcutt is in the operating room, the cardiac operating room, and we're doing a case, and her cell phone rings, and it's her 13-year-old son, who's an hour away and just finished a basketball game. He had to ride the bus because his mom is working and his dad is working, so he's by himself at this out-of-town basketball game. And he whispers to me, "Mom, you have to come pick me up." And of course, instantly I think that he's broken his arm, he's hurt himself. I said, "Well, why do I need to come get you? What's going on?" "Well, I got fouled with 5 seconds left in the game. I went to the free throw line, we were down by 1, and I missed both of my free throws. I really need you to come get me, Mom. I can't get on the bus. No, none of my teammates will look at me. I let everybody down. It's really bad here, Mom. You gotta come get me. I can't get on that bus and ride home with my teammates." Everything inside me wanted to be Mama Bear. "I'm coming to get you, baby. Just hold on." But I knew it was my moment to teach him. So I said to him what I want to leave you with. Get on the bus. You have to go get on the bus. And through tears in the operating room, I told my son, I have been there. I know what that's like to let everybody down and feel shame. But that's called life, and you have to get on the bus. So I hope that I have left you with some inspiration today, and I hope that maybe you've thought of a time that you failed. Maybe you're still holding on to that shame. Fail forward, and remember to get on the bus.